I used to believe family was the one place you could always feel safe, where the people who loved you would never hurt you. There were days I questioned whether I really knew the people closest to my heart. Today, I am going to share the story of how I discovered my parents had orchestrated the most horrifying plan I never saw coming. A discovery that changed everything I thought I knew about unconditional love. Before I dive into this story, I am curious to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, and do not forget to hit that like button. Trust me, you will want to subscribe, because what I am about to share will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Let's get started. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, I thought I had hit the family jackpot. My name is Morgan, and at 28, I had always considered myself blessed with parents who seemed to genuinely care. My dad, Robert, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, coming home every evening with his briefcase and tired smile. My mom, Linda, taught third grade at the local elementary school, the kind of teacher kids remembered fondly years later. She had this way of making everyone feel special, from her students to her own daughters. My sister Stephanie was 4 years older than me, and growing up, she was everything I aspired to be. Smart, confident, effortlessly beautiful. In that way, some people just are. She graduated valedictorian from high school, went to Colorado State University on a full scholarship, and landed a great job in marketing right after graduation. When she married David last year, it felt like watching a fairy tale come to life. He was kind, successful, and absolutely devoted to her. Their wedding was picture perfect, held at a vineyard outside of town, with 200 guests celebrating what seemed like the ideal couple. As for me, I had found my passion in graphic design, working for a small but growing agency in downtown Denver. The creativity fulfilled something in me that I had never experienced before. I had been dating Jake for 2 years now, a software engineer who made me laugh until my sides hurt and supported my dreams without question. Life felt good, stable, full of possibility. But last year, something shifted in our family dynamic. Stephanie and David had been trying to have a baby for 18 months with no success. What started as casual mentions of when we have kids gradually transformed into doctor visits, fertility tests, and increasingly stressful conversations around every family dinner. I watched my sister, who had always been so composed and in control, begin to unravel in ways that broke my heart. Mom became obsessed with Stephanie's fertility journey. Every phone call started with questions about appointments, test results, and new treatments they were considering. Dad, usually the practical one who stayed out of emotional discussions, began researching fertility clinics and treatment options with the intensity of someone studying for the most important exam of his life. The entire family seemed to revolve around this one missing piece of Stephanie's otherwise perfect life. I did everything I could to be supportive. I listened when Stephanie called crying after another negative pregnancy test. I researched natural fertility boosters and sent her articles about stress reduction techniques. When she and David decided to take a break from trying for a few months, I encouraged them to take that vacation to Europe they had been postponing. I thought I was being the perfect supportive sister. But somewhere around month 16 of their fertility struggles, I started noticing changes that made me uncomfortable. During my regular Sunday dinners at my parents' house, I would catch Mom and Dad having hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. They began asking about my health more frequently than seemed normal. Mom, who had never been particularly interested in the details of my menstrual cycle, suddenly wanted to know if I was regular, if I had ever had any gynecological issues, whether I had ever considered having children. At first, I attributed this to general worry. Parents do that, right? They see one daughter struggling with fertility and begin to worry about the other. When Dad suggested I should get a comprehensive health checkup, I figured it was just his accountant brain wanting to ensure everything was properly documented and monitored. When Mom started asking if I was taking prenatal vitamins, I laughed it off as her being overly cautious. But then came the phone call I was never supposed to hear. I had stopped by the house one evening to pick up a book I had left there. Mom was in the kitchen, and I could hear her voice from the hallway as I let myself in with my key. She was saying something about convincing Morgan and the timeline needs to work with her cycle. I froze in the entryway, straining to hear more, but she must have heard me come in because the conversation ended abruptly with a quick, "I have to go, she just got here." When I asked who she had been talking to, Mom brushed it off as a conversation with a friend about some project at school. But something in her tone, the way she would not quite meet my eyes, planted a seed of unease that would only grow in the coming weeks. 2 weeks after that strange phone call, Mom announced that she had made an appointment for me with Dr. Harrison, our family physician. She presented it as a routine checkup, the kind of preventive care that responsible adults schedule annually. I had not been to see Dr. Harrison in over a year, so it seemed reasonable enough. Mom offered to drive me, which was unusual since I had been driving myself to appointments for over a decade, but I chalked it up to her wanting to spend time together. The appointment itself felt off from the moment we arrived. Dr. Harrison, normally chatty and warm, seemed unusually focused and professional. After the standard checks of blood pressure, heart rate, and weight, he began asking questions that had nothing to do with general health. He wanted detailed information about my menstrual cycle, any history of reproductive issues, whether I had ever been pregnant. When I asked why this was relevant to a routine physical, he gave a vague answer about establishing baseline health metrics for women in their late 20s. Then came the blood work. Not just the standard panel I was expecting, but vials and vials of blood for tests he said would check hormone levels, nutrient absorption, and genetic markers for various conditions. He ordered an ultrasound of my reproductive organs, explaining that this was becoming standard practice for preventive women's health. The ultrasound technician was oddly thorough, taking measurements and images from every possible angle, asking me to hold various positions while she captured different views. Throughout all of this, Mom sat in the corner of the examination room, taking notes in a small notebook she had brought along. When I asked what she was writing, she said she wanted to keep track of everything for our family health records. Dr. Harrison nodded approvingly at this, saying it was wise for families to maintain comprehensive medical documentation. The entire appointment lasted nearly 2 hours, far longer than any routine checkup I had ever experienced. As we left, Dr. Harrison mentioned that the results would be ready in a week and that he would call to schedule a follow-up appointment to review everything together. He emphasized the importance of discussing the results with both me and my mother present, again citing the value of family health awareness. On the drive home, I tried to process what had just happened. Something felt fundamentally wrong, but I could not pinpoint exactly what. When I mentioned to Mom that the appointment had seemed unusually comprehensive, she replied that Dr. Harrison was just being thorough because he cared about our family. She reminded me that he had been our doctor for 15 years and had always gone above and beyond in his care. A week later, I returned to Dr. Harrison's office for the results appointment. Mom was there again, which should have been my first real red flag. 28-year-old women do not typically bring their mothers to medical consultations unless something is seriously wrong. Doctor. Harrison had prepared a folder thick with papers, test results charts, and printouts that he spread across his desk like a presentation. According to the results he showed me, I was the picture of reproductive health. My hormone levels were optimal, my reproductive organs were perfectly positioned and functioning, and I had what he described as an ideal uterine environment. He used phrases like excellent candidate and perfect genetic markers in ways that made me feel more like livestock being evaluated than a patient receiving medical results. But it was what happened next that should have sent me running from that office. Dr. Harrison began discussing surrogacy in general terms, explaining how some women with fertility challenges rely on family members to help them achieve their dreams of parenthood. He talked about the beauty of one sister helping another, the strength of family bonds, and how modern medicine made surrogacy safer and more successful than ever before. I interrupted to ask why he was telling me this. His response was that, given my sister's ongoing fertility struggles and my own excellent reproductive health, it might be something our family would want to consider in the future. He assured me that there was no pressure, but that it was important for me to understand all the options available to help Stephanie. Mom nodded along with everything Dr. Harrison said, occasionally adding comments about family supporting family and how blessed we were to have each other. As we left that appointment, she squeezed my hand and said how proud she was of how healthy and strong I was, and how grateful Stephanie would be to have such a wonderful sister. I drove home that day with a growing sense of dread that I could not shake. Nothing about those appointments had felt right, but I could not put my finger on what exactly was wrong. It would be another week before I discovered just how far down the rabbit hole of deception my family had already gone. The truth came crashing down on a random Tuesday afternoon when I stopped by my parents' house to pick up a jacket I had left there over the weekend. Mom and Dad were both at work, and I used my key to let myself in, planning to grab my jacket and leave. But as I was heading upstairs to get it from the guest room closet, I decided to use Dad's computer to quickly check my email. His home office was always meticulously organized, everything in its proper place. But as I sat down at his desk, I knocked over a small stack of folders, sending papers scattering across the floor. As I knelt to collect them, one folder caught my attention because it had my name written across the tab in Mom's careful handwriting. Inside that folder was my entire medical history, but not the version I knew to be true. These were the results from my recent appointments with Dr. Harrison, but the numbers had been altered. My hormone levels, which Dr. Harrison had described as optimal, were listed as even higher than optimal. My ultrasound images had been edited with measurements changed and notes added about exceptional uterine health and egg quality. But it was not just medical records. There were printouts of emails between my parents and several fertility clinics in the Denver area. The emails discussed surrogacy arrangements, compensation packages, and timelines. My name appeared throughout these conversations with references to my exceptional health profile and my willingness to help family. The most devastating email was from Stephanie, sent just 3 days earlier. In it, she thanked Mom and Dad for handling everything with Morgan and expressed her excitement about moving forward with the surrogacy process. She wrote about how grateful she was that they had found a way to convince Morgan to do this, because she knew it was the only way to make our family complete. I sat on Dad's office floor, surrounded by evidence that my entire family had been orchestrating a plan to use my body without my knowledge or consent. They had forged medical records, manipulated test results, and were actively shopping me around to fertility clinics as a surrogate, all while I believed I was simply getting routine health care. The betrayal was so profound that I actually felt physically sick. These were the people who had raised me, who had taught me about honesty and integrity, who I had trusted with every secret and fear throughout my entire life. And they had been planning to treat me like an incubator for my sister's baby, using falsified medical records to present me as the perfect candidate to fertility specialists. I photographed every document in that folder with my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to capture all the evidence. There were contracts that had already been partially filled out with my personal information consent forms that bore a forged signature that looked remarkably like my handwriting, and payment schedules that detailed how much compensation I would receive for carrying Stephanie's child. The most chilling part was how detailed and advanced their planning had become. They had already selected a fertility clinic, scheduled preliminary consultations, and outlined a timeline that would have me pregnant within the next 3 months. All of this had been arranged without a single conversation with me about whether I wanted to be a surrogate, whether I was comfortable with the process, or whether I had any plans for my own reproductive future. As I sat there processing the magnitude of their deception, I realized that every strange conversation, every unusual medical appointment, and every guilt-inducing comment about family loyalty had been part of a calculated campaign to manipulate me into carrying my sister's baby. They had never intended to ask for my permission because they had already decided that my body belonged to the family's needs rather than to me. I waited until that evening when my parents returned from work to confront them with what I had discovered. I had spent the afternoon planning what to say, but no amount of preparation could have equipped me for the gaslighting and manipulation that followed. When I laid the folder of forged documents on the kitchen table, Mom's first response was not shame or apology, but anger that I had been snooping through private family business. Dad immediately went into damage control mode, explaining that they had only been exploring options and gathering information to present to me when the time was right. Linda tried to frame their actions as loving preparation, insisting that they wanted to make the surrogacy process as smooth and stress-free as possible for both Stephanie and me. She cried as she talked about watching Stephanie suffer through months of failed attempts to conceive, painting their deception as a sacrifice they had made to spare me the burden of making a difficult decision under pressure. Robert presented spreadsheets showing the financial benefits of surrogacy, pointing out that the compensation would help me pay off my student loans and maybe even save for a house. He talked about surrogacy as an opportunity rather than an obligation, as if the fact that they had forged my medical records was simply an administrative detail in what would ultimately be a positive experience for everyone involved. But it was Stephanie's arrival that really revealed the depth of their coordinated deception. She must have been waiting nearby because she appeared at the front door within minutes of my confrontation beginning. Her reaction to my anger was not surprise or embarrassment, but frustration that I was making this more complicated than it needs to be. Stephanie sat across from me at the kitchen table and delivered what can only be described as a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She talked about the agony of watching friends get pregnant easily while she struggled month after month with disappointment. She described the strain on her marriage, the invasive medical procedures she had endured, and the depression that had consumed her life for the past 1.5 years. Then came the guilt. Stephanie reminded me of every time she had helped me throughout our lives. She had tutored me through high school math, co-signed my first apartment lease when I had no credit, and given me her car when mine broke down during college. She framed surrogacy as simply my turn to help her, as if carrying a baby was equivalent to borrowing money or getting a ride to the airport. When I pointed out that they had forged medical records and planned to arrange surrogacy without my consent, the family's response was to minimize the seriousness of their actions. Dad said the altered records were just optimizing the presentation of your health data to ensure that fertility clinics would take our family seriously. Mom insisted that they had always planned to get my permission before moving forward. They just wanted to have all the details arranged first. The pressure campaign that followed was relentless. Over the next 2 weeks, I was bombarded with calls, texts, and visits from family members I had not heard from in months. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about my obligation to help Stephanie. My aunt called to tell me about her own struggles with infertility and how much she wished she had had a sister willing to help. Cousins shared stories of families torn apart by selfishness and families strengthened by sacrifice. Even Jake, who I had expected to support me unconditionally, seemed confused about why I was so upset. He understood that forging medical records was wrong, but he also thought that helping my sister have a baby was a beautiful gesture. When I tried to explain that the issue was not surrogacy itself, but the deception and manipulation, he seemed to think I was overreacting to what was essentially a well-intentioned family plan that had gotten a little out of hand. The isolation was overwhelming. Every conversation became about my refusal to help Stephanie rather than about my family's betrayal of my trust. I was painted as selfish, stubborn, and heartless by people who had known me my entire life, but were apparently willing to overlook systematic deception as long as it served their preferred outcome. But being cornered and isolated also clarified something important for me. I realized that this was not really about surrogacy at all. This was about my family believing that my body, my medical decisions, and my reproductive future were theirs to control. They had proven that they were willing to lie forged documents and manipulate medical professionals to get what they wanted from me. So I decided not just to refuse their demands, but to take back control of my own narrative and hold them accountable for what they had done. My first step was to get real, unaltered information about my health. I made an appointment with Dr. Martinez, a gynecologist who had no connection to my family. I brought copies of the forged medical records and asked her to run the same tests to show me what my actual health profile looked like. Dr. Martinez was horrified by the altered documents and immediately offered to provide documentation of the real results for any legal proceedings I might want to pursue. Next, I contacted the medical board to report Dr. Harrison for participating in medical fraud. I provided copies of the original test results alongside the altered versions, along with documentation of how those falsified records were being used to arrange surrogacy without my knowledge or consent. The board launched an immediate investigation and temporarily suspended Dr. Harrison's license, pending a full review. But my most powerful action was deciding to tell my story publicly. I created a detailed post on social media documenting everything my family had done, including photos of the forged medical records, screenshots of the emails planning my surrogacy, and a timeline of how they had manipulated me through months of fake medical appointments. The post went viral within hours. Hundreds of people shared their own stories of family members crossing boundaries around pregnancy and reproductive decisions. The local news picked up the story, interviewing legal experts about the implications of forging medical records and arranging surrogacy without consent. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive, but the reaction from my family was explosive. They accused me of destroying our family's reputation for social media attention. Stephanie claimed that my post had ruined her chances of finding a legitimate surrogate because everyone in our community now knew about her fertility struggles. Mom and Dad threatened to cut me off financially, forgetting that I had been financially independent for years, but I had made my choice. I blocked their phone numbers, returned the key to their house, and made it clear that I would not be participating in any family events or conversations until they acknowledged what they had done and committed to never crossing my boundaries again. The hardest part was accepting that the family I had loved and trusted my entire life had been willing to sacrifice my bodily autonomy for their own goals. But I also realized that by taking a stand, I had probably prevented them from doing something similar to other people in the future. The immediate aftermath of going public with my story was more difficult than I had anticipated. While I received tremendous support from strangers online, the local fallout was swift and brutal. Dr. Harrison's medical practice was thoroughly investigated, resulting in his license being permanently revoked when investigators discovered that my case was not isolated. He had been altering medical records for several families involved in surrogacy arrangements, always in ways that made the potential surrogates appear more viable to fertility clinics. Stephanie and David were forced to start their surrogacy search over completely this time through legitimate legal channels with proper counseling and consent processes. The fertility clinic that had been planning to work with our family terminated their services when they learned about the forged documentation. Word spread quickly through the Denver medical community, making it more difficult for them to find providers willing to work with them. The social media attention brought consequences I had not expected. Our family became locally notorious for the story, with neighbors and community members taking sides. Some people approached me in grocery stores to express support, while others crossed the street to avoid me, apparently believing I had been cruel to refuse helping my sister. Mom lost several close friendships when other parents at her school learned about her role in forging medical documents. Jake struggled with the aftermath more than I had hoped. While he ultimately supported my decision to expose the truth, he was overwhelmed by the attention and controversy surrounding our relationship. After several long conversations about boundaries, family loyalty, and what we each needed moving forward, we decided to take a break from our relationship while I focused on healing from the betrayal. The loss of Jake felt like a second betrayal, even though I understood his position intellectually. I had expected my family to choose Stephanie over me, but I had believed that Jake would stand by me no matter what. Learning that even he had limits to how much controversy he was willing to accept in his life was devastating in a completely different way. For months, I felt utterly alone. I had lost my family, my boyfriend, and my sense of security in the community I had grown up in. There were days when I wondered if I had made the right choice, if I should have just agreed to the surrogacy to preserve all of these relationships that had meant so much to me. But therapy helped me understand that what I was grieving was not really the loss of loving relationships, but the loss of my illusions about people I had never truly known. A therapist helped me see that families who truly love you do not forge medical documents to control your reproductive decisions. Partners who truly support you do not abandon you when you stand up for your basic rights. Communities that truly care about you do not ostracize you for refusing to let your body be used without your consent. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life around people who respected my autonomy and supported my decisions, even when they were difficult. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with over the years, many of whom were horrified by my family's behavior and eager to provide the support I needed. I joined a support group for people who had experienced family estrangement, where I learned that my experience was far more common than I had realized. At work, my colleagues were incredibly supportive, and my boss even commended me for the courage it had taken to speak out about medical fraud. The graphic design skills I had developed helped me create materials for organizations working on reproductive rights and medical consent issues. Turning my personal trauma into advocacy work gave me a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. Most surprisingly, I began receiving messages from other women who had experienced similar pressure from their families around surrogacy pregnancy and reproductive decisions. Many of them had never spoken publicly about their experiences, but my story had given them language to describe their own boundaries being violated. Some had been pressured into pregnancies they did not want. Others had been criticized for not having children soon enough, and still others had family members who felt entitled to make decisions about their bodies and reproductive futures. Through these connections, I learned that what had happened to me was part of a much larger pattern of families treating women's bodies as community property rather than as belonging to the individual women themselves. This realization helped me understand that my decision to speak out had been about more than just my own situation. It had been about establishing the principle that no one has the right to make reproductive decisions for another person, regardless of their relationship or their intentions. A year after cutting contact with my family, I received a letter from Stephanie. She and David had successfully found a surrogate through proper legal channels and were expecting a baby in the spring. The letter was not an apology, but rather an attempt to persuade me to reconcile with the family before the baby was born. Stephanie wrote that she hoped I would be able to move past my anger so that I could be an aunt to her child. Reading that letter, I realized that Stephanie still did not understand what she and my parents had done wrong. She still viewed my refusal to carry her baby as the problem, rather than recognizing that their deception and manipulation had been a fundamental violation of my rights. The fact that she had found another surrogate and was expecting a baby proved that surrogacy itself had never been the issue. The issue had always been their belief that they were entitled to my body and my consent. I did not respond to Stephanie's letter, but I did send a brief message to my parents through a mutual family friend. I explained that I would consider rebuilding our relationship only after they acknowledged the full extent of what they had done, sought therapy to understand why their behavior had been abusive, and demonstrated over time that they had genuinely changed their approach to respecting my autonomy. That message went unanswered, confirming what I had already suspected. They still believed that they had been justified in their actions, and that I was the one who needed to change my perspective. 3 years have passed since I discovered those forged medical records in my father's office. I have built a life surrounded by people who respect my choices and support my decisions. I have learned to trust my instincts about when something feels wrong, even when other people try to convince me that my concerns are unreasonable. Most importantly, I have learned that love without respect is not really love at all. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing my family's actions so publicly, if I wish I had handled the situation more privately. My answer is always the same. I regret that they put me in a position where public exposure was necessary to protect myself and other potential victims. I regret that they chose deception and manipulation over honest conversation. But I do not regret standing up for my right to make decisions about my own body. The hardest lesson I learned through this experience is that the people who are supposed to protect you might sometimes be the very people you need protection from. But here is what I have discovered. Your worth is not determined by how well you serve other people's dreams. It is found in how courageously you defend your own truth. Have any of you ever experienced family members crossing major boundaries around personal decisions? How did you handle situations where people you trusted tried to manipulate or control aspects of your life that should have been entirely your choice? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Please like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that their boundaries matter and their consent cannot be assumed even by family. Thank you so much for listening and supporting others who have faced similar challenges. Remember, you always have the right to say no, and that right does not disappear just because someone loves you. Take care of yourselves out there,